All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome to another episode of Off the Wall. It's your boy Dazzle167, and we're bringing to you Mr. Hollywood himself, aka the Orisa flanking god, EvilToaster. How you doing, bro?
Hello, dude. It's going pretty good.
Going pretty
How
good.
about yourself?
Unlike that Havana game I just saw you.
Oh yes, I
The-
was.
that
I
was a
was quite
tough
the
one.
experience.
Right. Well, listen. I've been watching. I've actually been watching you for most of the day. Just lurking in chat, doing other stuff, and just watching you in the background. And I gotta say, I love I did my research. I went and I try to do as much possible to just find out what you're all about, because I knew when I first saw you, like I knew of you, and then I watched a little bit of you, but I wanted to go and deep dive into a lot of stuff, so I went into a lot of stuff. But before we do all of that stuff, let's take it all the way back. We usually do this for all of our guests, and I want to talk about the origins of EvilToaster and
The history, dude.
the history. So go all the way back to your gaming origins and what you first started playing, and stuff like that, and what system, what gaming, like how'd you start as EvilToaster?
So, I mean, there's photographic proof of me playing video games to the point where I pass out on the chair that I was playing in since
Right.
I was like 2 years old.
Nice.
So I was a young gamer. I think the first games I played, or maybe even the very first game I played, was like Commander Keen on the PC, on whatever we called PCs back then.
Right.
And I was is that echo hearable for everyone? I could hear myself through your mic. I don't know if that's a thing.
Oh, I think it's my headphones, but I think it should be fine
Yeah,
for
I'm a loud guy, so
That's right, but I think it should be fine. I think they might be hearing a little bit of it. I don't think it's that.
yeah.
I don't think it's too audible.
So I mean, so I just played games normally for that amount of time. I had I think the first console we actually had in the house. No, we had an NES in the house. I don't remember if we had an SNES, but we definitely had a Nintendo 64. We got a Dreamcast at some point. Not a bad console. And we got a GameCube and we got a PlayStation 2. And then somewhere around that part, we got more better PCs, and PC gaming was just a thing we did a little more often. And I didn't even get like the next gen until I started taking games more seriously, because the first games that, well, there was like a competitive era, but before that there was like a taking games seriously non-competitive era, where I was playing things like, I was like speedrunning games, for example, or I was playing like games that were deemed like some of the most difficult games known to mankind, which is like clickbait. But like, I did speedruns for some platinum games. I did Vanquish, I did Metal Gear Rising, which are both great games, and they were really fun to speedrun. I also had an era where I did the speedruns of Just Cause 2 when that was a thing, which was an interesting speedrun, not very typical. It was like 4 hours though. It was not very fast.
I'm not gonna lie, that game is awesome though. I love the Just
Yeah,
Cause series.
I
Yeah.
love Just Cause 2. It was a very good game. But I was just interested in speedrunning at the time. And then I got into a point where I started doing shmups, and I started playing games like Ikaruga mainly. And Ikaruga is a notoriously difficult space shooter kind of game, where I would say it took me about 1 year of dedicated play. I played every day to beat the game for the first time, and that game is about 20 minutes long.
Nice.
Which is like, it's really hard, but I did it. It took a while, but I did it. And that's just one of the things that I could put on my gamer resume, because one day that'll be valuable.
Right.
Sure.
Right. I mean, who knows, right? I think those types of things, like I think speedrun, I mean, even when I was at TwitchCon, speedrun it's still huge thing, right? And those types of games, that is something that could go on a gamer resume. And I think now that gaming itself is like getting up there in the industry as far as like, you know, the spotlight goes. I think now when people go look back and look back at harder games, that is going to be something that people are going to be like, oh, that is a trophy. That's a trophy. Being able to
Yeah,
do that. Absolutely.
it's
I want to ask you something real quick is, you know, we talked about like, you know, the types of games that you were playing, your speed running and stuff like that. And what eventually linked you into Overwatch, because, you know, that's when I personally started seeing you, and I started seeing like you play and stuff like that. So tell us a little bit about the transition of what you were doing before Overwatch and before your stream and stuff like that, and how you got into it.
well, it all started when I like decided that I wanted to get good at games, like competitive games, really. And that all started with Street Fighter 4. I was an 09er, as they called them. And that was when I started playing the PC version, but I realized, you know, everyone started playing on consoles. So then I got the 360 and started playing that. But that's when I started playing online. That's when I started thinking like, oh, I need to like learn how to be better at like direct competition. Because every game I played up until then, it was just comparing high scores, you know, or comparing times. Now I actually have to be better at the game as someone else in a direct contest. And that's when I started, you know, exploring that side. I played fighting games for a while. I mainly played Marvel vs. Capcom 3 at the time. I played that for a few years.
Okay.
Then I got into League of Legends. I played that for about 2 years. Then I played Hearthstone for a few months before Overwatch came out, and then Overwatch came out. And I just kind of got into it immediately. I started playing, started climbing the ladder. I started playing on teams. I started scrimming against other players in other teams at the time. And I was on that grind for contenders, whatever contenders was at the time. There was like contender season 0, and my team actually made it to like top 32 at the time out of like 600 teams. So we weren't bad. We weren't Overwatch League bound, but we were pretty good. And that was like, it was just really just what came up. Like, I know I wanted to explore as many genres as I could as a
Right.
gamer, like my gaming career. That's why I like did things like speedruns and shmups and MOBAs and all that. And I never really got into a competitive shooter before, so I figured that Overwatch would be a good chance to start fresh with something. Because every competitive shooter at the time was like Counter-Strike. It's like everyone's already been playing that game for a decade. Or Quake, everyone's already been playing that game for a decade. Like there was nothing new and fresh that I knew was going to be competitive. And so Overwatch just seemed like the best opportunity for me to jump into that genre. So I did. And then I became an Orisa one trick.
And so tell me a little bit about those early contenders days. Obviously, you know, when Overwatch started, you know, and OWO wasn't even a thought at that point. You know, there was still a scene going on. I mean, I remember when people were competing against each other in like the you know, the monthly type of competitions. And what was, you know, obviously, yeah, exactly, the what was it, monthly melee, right? Alienware.
Monthly melee.
Right, and people were doing that, and I mean, those are that we're talking about season 1 when, you know, there was no limit characters, right, where you could just pick you could pick whatever characters you wanted and stuff like that.
5 Tracers was the competitive meta.
Right. So what was it for like back then for you to scrim? Like how was the scrimming process? Because I'm sure now it's obviously a lot more refined. We've got an esports behind it and stuff like that. So obviously there's things that are a little more refined. But back in those days where it was kind of like learn as you go, what was sort of like the scrim environment like? What were you playing specifically?
Well, it was a little more. It's a little more refined now.
Right.
From all the stories I hear of tier 2 these days, it's not that much better, but at least it's more open.
Right.
Because a lot of Overwatch back then was really more of a boys club, where the people who knew each other and were friendly with each other were usually the people that got the most opportunities. And that's just kind of a thing with esports in general. It's always been that way. It probably will be for a long time. And that's also kind of one of the reasons why I really appreciated fighting games so much, because in a fighting game tournament, those tournaments are open. You could show up to the
Right.
venue, enter tournament, and you could win if you're good enough. It doesn't matter who you are. So I've always appreciated that. And coming from fighting games to a scene like this with team-based esports, it was really different.
It's
And
very different. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. And you know what's funny too is I've interviewed some Mortal Kombat professionals, like people who have gone to Evo and stuff like that, and a lot of them, they tell me and that the fighting game genre is just so much more diverse. There's so much diversity, so many females and a lot of different people from different races who get to compete. You don't really see that a lot, in particular for like other esports, but for the fighting game community is such a diverse group of people, and it's so cool to see. So I could definitely see like where you're coming from, where it's a different different thing to get into. But I want to ask you about a little. Let's get into a little bit more of the Overwatch specifics. And before I mention this, I also want to talk about like I want to talk about later in the show about the Riot announcement, because I know you're excited about that. I know I'm excited about it. Everybody is. But let's get into a little bit of Overwatch stuff. I want to talk to you about some of the stuff that you've said in the past. I was, as I was doing my research and looking at some of the stuff that you were talking about for a long time. And we could date this back for like a year. You've been talking about Overwatch having a tanking crisis, of sorts, where there's a lot less people playing tanks. The caliber of tanks that are being played, the people who are playing aren't, the people feel like they have to flex into those roles and stuff like that. Tell us a little bit more about what do you think about tanking now, especially now that we have post Halloween patch with, some of the buffs and stuff like that. I mean, I know that so far people have been saying that double shield is still meta and stuff like that. What do you think? Did the patch do anything for main tanking? Are we looking at less of a crisis, or is it still the same?
generally speaking, the patch didn't really change much.
Right.
Like the root of the tanking crisis is that because there are so few tank players and so few people willing to queue as tank, it hurts the queue times of the other roles, and it creates less competitive integrity when the games are actually matched. Because I will have games where one game I'll have a 43 average SR game and I'm a tank, and then the next game it will literally be like 3,500, like diamond games,
Right.
like back to back. And that's like that would be unheard of in like the earlier years of Overwatch.
Right.
Like that'd just be crazy. So, but that's the reality for tank players right now. That's just what their queues are. And the only good way to fix that problem is to have more tank players and to make tank more enticing, because it's just affecting everyone. Like DPS players get longer queue times, and they'll randomly sometimes have diamond tanks on their team, or
Right.
be against like a top 500 tank if they're in masters. And supports kind of have a similar problem too. There's less supports in DPS still, but there's still not as there's it's still too crowded. Like the amount of tanks there are in any given queue compared to supports and DPS is like astronomical. And
Right.
it's causing, and the other side effects of that crisis is that now, because DPS players see less value in being high elo, and even some support players as well, they're all just making smurfs. They're all
Right.
doing their unranked to GM challenges with random heroes, or they're just playing whatever the heck they want on a different account, in gold or
Right.
whatever. Because what do you get for being high elo? You get to play like one game an hour, and there's no guarantee it's going to be a good match. Like role queue was introduced to ensure that every match was closer to a high quality game, and it technically succeeds, because a game with 6 DPS players is not really fun. It's not really fair, but you still don't guarantee a good match because there's not enough players in the pool to have an accurate match. So it'll still feel random, even though I'm sure Blizzard has their statistics and says like, oh, based on all this, it's still like a 50% chance of one team winning or not.
Right.
But it's still really hard to make these matches, and I'm have a hard time being convinced that it works that way, because I talked to some other people about matchmaking. Like, some people have actually programmed matchmaking systems in games. And they're like, yeah, if there's like, even like a 5% difference in a skill rating between two teams, the team with the advantage has like an 80 to 90% chance of winning.
Right, because there is I mean, the skill gap still is there. I mean
Right.
that, and it's pretty large. I mean, so do you think that role queue in that sense, considering that, obviously these queue times have a lot to do with, like, it has to do with dwindling population and people just making smurfs and going to lower elos and stuff like that. Do you think that the role queue was a little too late for what it was trying to do?
That is a question I haven't been asked yet. I haven't thought about it, but my knee jerk reaction would be yeah, because like so many people have already transitioned away from the game, and like I said before, like role queue is shows that Blizzard has a new set of values for what they believe Overwatch should be. Because when Overwatch launched, they were like, you could be whatever hero, all comps should be roughly equally viable. There's no rules. It's just pick your hero. But now they see like how much they can't work in that system to make a balanced game, and how much trouble it causes for the queue, because when everyone has the same MMR effectively for every character, then no game is going to be really accurate if anyone in the game can't play their role, which they have been in discussion with on when they announced role queue.
Right.
But
So
this is the problem, is that, oh
yeah.
sorry,
No, go
is
ahead. Go
that
ahead.
it's so late because they changed their idea. They
Right.
have to rebuild everything around these new ideals,
Right.
and it's less about it being too late, more about just being such a daunting task to rebalance every hero,
Yeah.
redo like every system in the game, which they're kind of like trying to do slowly. Role queue was the big first step. But yeah, because the game's already been alive for 3 years, like so many people have already gone away because it wasn't that what it is now. And if Blizzard had first made the game, um, that's a strange question.
That is a strange question.
If Blizzard had first made the game with these new ideals in mind, then we would already be in a world with a better game.
Right.
So I feel like Blizzard suffered from a case of not doing their homework, because this same thing kind of happened in League of Legends. Because for a long time in League of Legends, Riot was like, hey, we don't want to impose any meta on our players.
Right.
We, if you want to play, 5 people mid lane, then you can, if you think it's a good strategy. And technically, there
Right.
have been times there is a recorded pro match of League of Legends of a team going like 4 people mid with Heimerdinger, and like it was a legitimate strat. They won the game, and they had like Olaf jungle or something, and it worked. And seeing that game has got Riot to think, yeah, cool game, we're successful. We're there doesn't need to be a meta. But no one in solo queue is going to run that, and it also turns out that no one in solo queue wants to run that. People want
Right.
to have the laning phase, people want to have the mid game, people want to have the late game team fights in that order all the time, because that's really fun. So Riot decided, we're going to enforce the meta, not because we believe it's necessarily like the best, even though it was, but because the game is more fun that way.
Right.
And sure enough, they started enforcing the meta. And now when you queue up for League, you're going to queue up as a role, top lane, mid lane, whatever. And they, rebalanced as many things as they had to over time. And now that the game is more refined, it's much better for it.
And they're better
And,
for it, right? Like
yeah,
they made it, it's more enjoyable for, I think, everyone involved, either watching it or both playing for it. And I think that's, like you said, I think that's where Blizzard didn't do their due diligence, right? I think role queue wasn't a thing that it wasn't something that just sparked and Blizzard was like, oh yeah, let's do it. It's been an idea for a long time. I mean, the people have asked for it for a very long time. And if you think about it, you know, to you, what do you think it would be like if roll queue was implemented, you know, before goats or even during goats? Like, how do you think that would have gone? Would that have saved the dwindling population of Overwatch at that time, or do you think it would have still been the same?
Well, for one, Brigitte wouldn't exist,
Right,
which
right,
would, which was a Brigitte was probably the biggest disaster of this game's history. Going to be completely honest, like
right,
that character like lived such a long life in the forefront of the meta and was not well received by anyone. Like, and she was so powerful, and I've talked about this many times before. Brigitte was so powerful that even her just existing in the game changed the meta, because during the start of season 10 when she was released, people didn't actually play Brigitte.
right,
They started trying to like play Brigitte with like triple tank and whatever, which is we now know as goats, but people just realized, oh, grab Hanzo, it just beats it because you damage boost the ult and then you know it's a free kill. And then people realized, well, if we're just going to play that, we don't need to play Brigitte. So then they started
right,
playing double sniper with grav combo. And normally you would just play dive into that and just, you know, dive the snipers, dive the supports, and it'd be free. However, if you went dive, that would be your whole team switching to another comp, and any one character on the other team could switch to Brig immediately, and with no ult charge invested, immediately counters your whole team. So you all have to swap back.
right.
So no one went Brigitte, but she made the game the Grav Hanzo meta that we knew at season 10. And as soon as they nerfed it, she was back on duty being the actual meta pick. And then we had goats for a year.
Right. And that leads me to a different question, because and it's sort of along the same lines. You know, we talked about how roll queue changed the idea of what they should have done and how they should have done this. But in this case, I think, you know, for people who are playing the game, you know, we went from a meta that at the beginning was dive, and it was very dynamic and fast paced, and you know, had a lot of strategy involved. And then we kind of dwindled a little bit away from that, and then going into like even goats meta, you know, it was still a little more fast paced and dynamic, but a little less dynamic. But still all about more about survivability and just being able to outlive your opponents, right? I mean, that was kind of the
Yeah.
point. And now we've kind of taken that idea and just ran with it, and Blizzard just kind of, you know, has this, now the meta is bunker, where it's just outlasting your opponent, right? Where they're creating characters like Brigitte and Baptiste to just outlive your opponent as opposed to outskill them. Do you think that's something that that's what Blizzard was trying to do, and going in that direction alienated all the people who, you know, thought that skilled characters, you know, wasn't meta anymore?
I think what Blizzard is trying to do, and what I think was pretty apparent with Baptiste, was try to make the support class more enticing to the general shooter audience. Because most support heroes do not appeal to your average DPS overlord that want to just do the shooty, carry the team, be super
Right,
cool. So they wanted to add characters that have big plays, that have guns, and you know have a higher level of skill.
right,
And Baptiste was meant to be that character, I feel. And I do think Bap has a pretty high skill cap. I do think he scales
right,
with, you know, how well you can shoot your gun. However, part of the way that they made him powerful and have big plays is an ability that prevents your team from dying, that in many cases can literally not be shot. So it
right,
ends
yeah,
up making these strategies where it's not really even about shooting anymore. It's just about these abilities. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you're not forcing abilities because you've outplayed someone.
right,
It's more just like, oh, you outskilled them once, but they still have this button. So now you
right,
have to disengage from the fight and then try again and hopefully win before that button comes back. That's
right.
what a lot of Overwatch is, even like even back in the older days of like, you know, just normal death ball, like back with just Ryan Zarya 222. It was all about Zarya bubbles because Zarya was like the big deal at that time, where we'd be like, okay, we need to force Zarya bubbles, and then we make a move when Zarya doesn't have energy or her cooldowns. That was a default strategy back in the day. You would like try to land Pharah rockets. You would try to like, you know, land a pin or anything. Like it was just things like that. Forcing cooldowns has always been like, you know, the strategy of playing this game, and any game that's like this, like any MOBA, like you try to do that in League 2, you'd be like, oh, I got them to use their mobility skill. Now we have an opening to actually, you know, lock them down. But now it's less about continuing the fight or outplaying. It's like literally the fight is get this rid of this ability, then go away because you know you
Right.
can't win because that ability is just so strong. Like ultimates are a lot like that too. Like Orisa's Bongo, it's like, oh, we got Orisa's Bongo, run away. Like we're not
Right.
gonna outplay it. We have to, it's better value, but to just run away.
Right, right. And to that effect, the characters that keep popping up, the new characters specifically, you know, they all have this air of like survivability, which just makes it, you know, Blizzard pushes it towards that type of gameplay where, you know, I mean, I think Baptiste as a character is a great character, but the immortality field just kind of makes him not broken in the, I mean, I don't want to say broken because I don't feel like he's broken, but in conjunction with other characters, you know, the meta becomes just, you know, I'll put immortality field, I'll do this, I'll do that, and it becomes more survivability over and over again, and it becomes such a daunting task to eliminate the enemy team because they have so many abilities to keep them alive for that longer. So do you think how do they, even if they wanted to, but like how would they kind of stray away from that if that's what they wanted to do? Because I feel like people just feel like that's not as fun anymore as just kind of like outliving somebody like in the game. Do
Right.
you think that that's something that they, how do they stray away from that in your opinion?
Well, Blizzard definitely wants to have characters and roles that aren't necessarily shooter skill based. Like they want characters to be skilled, well, some of them,
Right,
but they want their skill to be on a different axis than just how well you can aim. And that's fair and that's valid.
right,
And Overwatch was definitely meant to be a game that would attract players from all different kinds of genres and different kinds of games. Like they got MMO players, they got fighting game players, they got everyone, dude, to get in
right,
on this game. And that's what's a good thing because they all had a character they could relate to or transfer their skill set to and start playing competitive and be productive. However, the game at the end of the day is still a shooter, or you know, meant to be. Like that's what seems to be like the most fun way to play the game is, and we could tell because the most populated role right now is DPS.
right,
Most people who play Overwatch want to shoot people,
right,
or at least shoot something that feels rewarding to do. Because like shooting barriers does not feel rewarding ever. There are
right,
some things that aren't players that feel rewarding to shoot, like I don't know, like a battlefield. Like cool, you got it around a corner or something, you're cool. Or you killed like a bongo, like things that matter, or like a Symmetra turret. Like if you hit it in midair, you're like, yeah, I'm good.
right,
But a barrier, it's just like, wow, okay, it feels like you're wasting time. So how do they get around it? We're going back to the original question here. Is that they need to design heroes that have more interactivity or more reliant on, I guess, the analog skill of shooting, but more it's they don't even need to necessarily make characters that like have to aim. Like not every character has to be an aim hero,
right,
but every character shouldn't have something that makes anyone else's expression of a skill feel meaningless.
right,
Like, for
right.
example, one thing I've always said, well, not always, but I thought of it like a few months ago. It's like, what? Imagine a world. This is mostly thought experiment. I'm not saying this would be the best idea, but imagine you had all barriers in the game acted like walls in Fortnite, where when you're mining it, a little indicator shows up, and if you shoot
Ah,
that, it does extra damage. All of a
right.
sudden, shooting shields is like playing Osu, and all the
Yeah.
DPS players love that game and they get to express how good they are at shooting shields better than another DPS player. All
Right.
of a sudden, shooting shields might seem fun again to them because now, you could do it better than someone else. You get to express your skill. That's what players want to do, especially DPS players. But barriers aren't like that. They just make you stop playing the game. So what do tanks and supports need to do? Oh, and then supports, it's just like sometimes characters get healed so much that you don't even do damage to them. Or they
Yeah.
have like literally, like if you're doing a 1v1 with another player and they have a support pocket of almost any kind, you just lose. Like
Right.
there's nothing that you can do. You just have to disengage or hope that you're also getting pocketed, and then you'll have a longer fight.
Right.
And it sucks because once again, your ability to express skill is being taken away. So what they have to do is make tanks more focused on tanking in more indirect ways instead of, or more direct ways, I guess, because I guess a barrier is indirect tanking because you're not actually there taking the damage. You just throw the barrier into their face.
Right.
Your Orisa or Sigma, at least. Like Reinhardt, for example, no one really complained about Reinhardt too much.
Well, because he's kind of like the perfect character for the game in the sense, like he's the perfect main tank because he doesn't take away, like you said, he doesn't take away your ability to feel like you don't have a skill. You just feel matched with him as opposed to, him taking away something from you.
Right. Like when both teams just have Reinhardt, the game feels fine. But
Right.
no one's ever complained about Rein barrier because he doesn't also kill you while his barrier is up.
Yeah, it's either
And
one or
if
the
you're
other.
right. And if you're shooting Reinhardt enough, he has to like move slower. So you're still, getting a reward because you're forcing him to position differently. But even though like you see the rewards,
Right.
it feels better to shoot a Reinhardt shield than any other shield because it's not just going to come back immediately.
Exactly. So okay, so going along those lines with roll queue and stuff like that. You previously stated that, flanking as Orisa is a lot harder now, because through roll queue, because you took advantage of disorganized queues. Specifically talking about Orisa, what do you think would make her a lot more fun to play? Because when I first met you, when we met at TwitchCon, that one of the things I saw was like, oh, that's EvilToaster. Like the first thing I was like, oh, that's the Orisa guy. Like I know, and then so I went and I was like, well, let's talk about Orisa because when I first started watching your streams way back, I remember you as the guy who played Orisa when Orisa wasn't meta. Right, when she wasn't super meta, and you played with other people who their characters wasn't meta either, like people like Steve-O and stuff like that, which by the way would now be meta, Symmetra and Orisa. Sure. Right, I mean that would be the meta right now. So thinking about those days, about how you would take advantage of disorganized queues, what do you think would make it fun for the general population, not just someone like you obviously who's skilled at the character, but anybody would be, what would be fun for people to play Orisa with? Like how can they make that happen? Because it's like you mentioned, you don't even play her that much. I mean, I saw you play her today a lot, but you mentioned that in your stream time. You were like, I'm making an effort to play Orisa today, but you've been playing Hammond, I've seen you play Winston and Reinhardt, and that was just today. So yeah. So I've seen you play a lot of stuff. And you told me that Orisa's just not fun anymore. What do you think can be done to make her fun?
I think Orisa's problem is it's pretty similar to a DPS problem where there's less ways now to express your skill. Where it's before, like for example, back when Orisa wasn't meta, I was still a top 500 gamer pretty consistently across all seasons. And I was able to very clearly express myself because I was like one of the only people playing Orisa. Everyone thought she was bad. I was still Grandmaster / top 500. So I was proving something, regardless. And that made me feel good. So just being an off-meta player in itself, is one thing. And there's a lot of people that share that sentiment. It's like, oh, whenever my character becomes meta, I don't like playing them. And a
Right.
lot of that
Right.
is just rooted in the idea of they want to feel unique. They want to express themselves and like
Right.
pick a character that's theirs. And like everyone likes that. Like even an Overwatch League player wants to be like that Torbjorn guy. Like there
Right.
is a that Torbjorn guy in the Overwatch League.
Right.
Like things like that happen. But there's not a lot of characters, so there's not a lot of room for that. It's not like other MOBAs that have like 150 characters or more. So with this game, you kind of have to express yourself just through being really good or having your own strategies or just being on top of the ladder all the time. So I like to play Rissa, and the way that I feel good is whenever I do something that I know that like only I can do.
Right.
And trying to do that as a general audience Arissa player, there's almost nothing that you can do right now, because the double barrier meta means most of your bullets are not going into people. It means you're so important to the team that you can't do anything risky. It
Mm.
means that your barrier is determining like everything, so you always have to have it there for your team all the time pretty much.
Right.
And you're basically just going to sit there, shoot the other shield while you make your shields, and there's no way for you to do it better than another Orisa. That's the big problem.
Right.
Like I said with the shield Fortnite examples, like you could shoot a shield better than another player if there was a test of skill within shooting a barrier. With Orisa, the default gameplay loop of playing Orisa in this meta in particular, there's no way to be better than another Orisa. So you don't express your skill.
Right.
So it doesn't feel very fun. Compare that to other metas, like even in the Orisa Hog meta, even though it was pretty still like same gameplay cycle every team fight, you could be a better Orisa than the other Orisa if you managed halts better, if you knew when to walk past shields, knew when to like do a CS:GO shield or something like that. Like there's small ways to make yourself clearly better than the other Orisa that just don't exist right now in a double barrier meta. Excuse me. And of course, before Orisa was meta at all, if you were winning with Orisa at all, you were expressing your skill
Right.
because you were the only one that was doing it.
Right.
And the only time and then I had like the flank Orisa phase where like for a whole week or so, I would just play Orisa as a flank DPS hero. And it was pretty fun. And it was a way that I played Orisa and was able to express myself. So of course I just enjoyed playing the game because I knew what playing it normal was like. It just wasn't fun. So for the general audience and also for game designers and for Blizzard, it's like that's really where the focus needs to be. And how do you make your characters feel like you can express yourself? Because the only great way of expressing yourself with a lot of characters right now is playing them incorrectly, and it still works, which means you kind of have to compensate for the bad strategy. It's like if you were like, let's take Brigitte for example. Like Brigitte in the older meta was basically had a very default game plan in a
Right.
flowchart. It's like you have a 600 health barrier, you regen all your health really fast, just go in, hit people, and don't ever die.
Right.
And there was not a lot you could do. But then, like for one patch, someone discovered a bug with Brigitte where if you cast your shield and your whip shot at the same time, you just zoomed across the map, dude. Like it was just this hyper jump, and it was really cool. And it came at a cost because you had to use both of your cooldowns. Like it was kind of fair,
Yeah. Yeah.
honestly.
Yeah.
But Blizzard immediately patched it away. But for that moment, a lot of people loved playing Brig because they would just zoom across the map with Brig and do all these janky flank plays, and it was just really cool.
When you could do something unique too, that and then once you became good at that particular skill set, it would be unique to yourself. I mean, I think one of the things that brought me to the game personally was people like you and people like DSP Stanky, who excelled at Lucio, when people just thought as Lucio as a healer, or people like Colorblind, who did the same thing as with Bastion, and even Stevo with people, like Symmetra, where those characters weren't, whether they were meta or not, they did something particular with those characters that made them as a streamer unique, and they made the gameplay unique. I mean, I think when I first started watching you, I was like, wow, this guy's getting so many boops, like as Orisa. Like, you thought about the character in a different way, especially when you would flank as a main tank. You would never think that one of the slowest characters in the game could do that. And that's such an interesting thing to watch. And like you said, now there's a lot less of that. Which that brings me to like the different question about you, particularly as a streamer, because throughout your Overwatch history, there's been a lot of people who they either love you or hate you. Doing some of the research, there was a lot of people. You've received a lot of hate. Even today, I was watching you. There was people in, like, I believe there was a Hanamura game. You were like, all right, I just got to mute these two people, like, because it was like, there's always gonna be those types of people. I was reading a particular Reddit post, and one Reddit user said, he said he plays exactly the heroes he wants, and he mostly plays them in his own way, and not the correct pro way. Do you think that statement for you still rings true as far as like as an Overwatch player, or do you think you've outgrown that phase and now, because you do flex a lot now?
Well, I mean, main reason I flex a lot lately is because I just don't want to play Orisa.
Right.
In the current meta. But
right. There's no altruism there. You just don't want to play Orisa.
Right. But yeah, Reddit is a great place for EvilToaster research, I'm telling you. And that statement that I mean, I do play the heroes I want. That is very true. And most of the game I did want to play Orisa. Right now, meta was in a place where it's not. Maybe on the new patch, I'll see some new stuff with Orisa, even though she got nerfed. But because of everything else happened, maybe it won't be so bad.
Right.
Namely, Doomfist. Hint. But as far as not playing it in the correct way or in the pro way, at the end of the day, what we deem is correct in a video game as a strategy, a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it is basically the subject to the appraisal of the players. There's not a lot of guaranteed 100% correct, this is the right play kind of move. But there are going to be some, like especially when you get into less analog games, like instead of a shooter, you have like a card game where like you could clearly say and calculate the percentage chance of this play working is greater than 50% in this situation. Therefore, it is the correct play. Even though it's not a 100% guarantee, it's still the right thing to do. So you would do it all the time. Right. Because without being able to gather information on every other factor, you just have to maximize your chance of success. Now, in Overwatch, the game, especially solo queue, is so disorganized, it's so finicky, matchmaking is so random, and there's anything that you could determine to be like the best play 100% of the time because it gives you the highest chance of success. It's so hard to determine it. Like the way that I've always seen solo queue, and like I've gone back into like my win rate history across all seasons. I've played thousands of games of Overwatch. My win rate is roughly like 52% across my entire competitive history.
Right.
Which a lot of people look at that and be like, ha, only 52%,
but like, considering how many games you played and
right.
Right. That's you're still positive.
Right. Like no player, like sure there's going to be some people out there with like 55% across like 10,000 games if they played that much in Overwatch, and some have. I'm pretty sure I have at this point. But that it doesn't matter that much, because like the way that win rate isn't even a great statistic to track people's skill anymore, because the higher you go, the less SR you gain for winning and the more difficult your games become.
Right.
So everyone's going to average at 50% win rate at some point, no matter what. That's the whole point of matchmaking anyway. It just you get slightly higher percentages if you're in the higher elos, because since you lose more SR per loss, you're going to get put in easier games faster. Therefore, you'll start winning more, assuming that you average at that SR. So for me, I've always averaged, whatever SR. I've been a top 500 gamer most of the time. The last season in particular, this season 18, has been different just because I haven't played Orisa and I've been playing a lot of not Orisa, which is a learning experience. I'm getting better at all these other tanks, which I'm very happy for, but a lot of people hate that because I'm not carrying them hard enough. So if I'm in a lower elo, they're like,
Right.
oh, freaking EvilToaster on my team, throwing the game, not playing Orisa.
Right.
But in reality, I'm at the SR I belong at, just like they are, and I'm playing a new hero to learn them. So I'm not
Right.
a one trick anymore, which they all criticize me for. Anyway, there's nothing I could do. Everyone's
Right.
going to criticize me no matter what for whatever reason, because people's egos are too fragile that they can't handle admitting that they are not winning as many games as they would like because of their own abilities. It's always going to be something, anything that they could point at and say, we lost because of this guy, or we lost because of that guy, or we lost because matchmaking is bad, or we lost because Blizzard
Right.
made a bad game and this character is OP, or something. Always, because that's how gamers are. It's all about protecting ego, and if that's your angle, Overwatch is a great game at protecting your ego.
Yeah.
Like, you could lose all you want, and you could just say, you could play it off as being like, oh, matchmaking is really bad, because it kind of is. You could say, oh, this character is really OP, because they are. You could say, someone on your team threw, because they probably did. And at the end of the day, like, you kind of have those excuses because of all of these systems that Blizzard isn't really taking care of. But even then, if you're really good, even through those games, you're going to rise through the ranks. It's just going to be slower,
Right.
because the more variance in matchmaking, the more games are decided by their playing meta and you're not, the longer it's going to take for you to get to the SR you belong at. But you're still going to get there because
Right.
you have more control over your team than you have over the enemy team, because you're one of the 6 slots that you control on your team.
Yeah.
So if you're not a thrower, that is a 1/6 less percent chance of your team having a thrower.
Right.
Whereas the other team has 6 chances to have a thrower, because there's 6 empty slots. There's only 5 empty slots on your team.
Right. And it's, I think you were one of the early people who I heard when people were complaining about roll queue, and complaining, the main complaint was, oh, all these inflated SRs, if you're a support player and you suddenly queued for DPS, you were probably, because there wasn't an established MMR for that role, you were probably going to, if you were a low GM player for Masters, you were probably going to be a low GM DPS as well. And then, you were one of the people who were like, guys, calm down. This is all gonna, the more those roles get played by those players, the more they'll go down to their actual rank, to where they're supposed to be. I mean, I remember, that exactly happening to me, where I'm a Masters support player, right? And then when I started playing DPS, which I am historically bad at, I went all the way down to platinum, even though I was like in Masters when I got in, but I just started playing more and then went down, and people would be like, your DPS is terrible. I'm like, yeah, that's why I'm here. Like, that's why I'm in this elo. Like, this is where I'm supposed to be. Like, it's not, so it inflates, and it all goes back down to zero. But I want to move on to something a little different, and something that I think we're both excited about. I know you mentioned it today as well. You mentioned it in your stream title about how the new announcements by Riot almost made you cry, and how visibly you were yelling, and how your parents had to be like, hey, what's going on up there? Like, why? Yeah, are you okay? And it's like, you're like, no, don't worry, it's just something that might possibly be life-changing, that's all. so talk to me about your thoughts on Project A and all of the stuff that Riot has announced, because I want to throw this in comparison next to Blizzard, because we're gonna get BlizzCon soon, and we're gonna get more news about Overwatch. Supposedly some news, people have been talking about maybe Overwatch 2 or whatever the case may be. We already saw how Fortnite was able to kind of take the game that they already have and, do something really unique and cool and reshape the way their game is to do the same game, but just better. Do you think that's somewhere where Overwatch should go to, or do you think Riot Games is just gonna be like, hey, just gonna bully Blizzard into being like, hey, we're the new sheriff in town?
Yeah, so Riot Games had a 1 hour freaking game reveal that was better than all of E3. And
facts, that's facts.
And they basically said they put every game developer on notice, honestly, especially Blizzard. And it wasn't even intentional because all these games have been in development for like 5 years. Probably.
Right.
The timing is just very fortunate. They could not have predicted that by the time it's Riot's 10th anniversary for League of Legends, it just so happens that Blizzard is in the middle of a PR disaster.
Yes. Oh God. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I didn't even think about that too.
Yeah. I mean, not that Riot is doing any better on that front, but
right.
We'll save that for another episode.
Right.
But right now, like, what games do Blizzard have? They have Overwatch, they have Hearthstone, and they have Diablo, and they have World of Warcraft, which they're not touching yet.
Right.
Riot isn't, at least. I heard there were rumors about a Riot MMO, but probably not anytime soon.
Right.
Blizzard or Riot was basically like, hey, we have a new shooter that we actually care about what dedicated players think about. We have a new card game that has what actual dedicated players worry about. And they're also making like a dungeon crawler. It's probably going to be something like Diablo, maybe.
Right.
And they also have a fighting game, which is just kind of sitting there. Apparently, it's not even close to done, so it's not worth talking about too much. Although, as a fighting gamer, I'm very excited for it. But from what I've been told on Twitter, like, that game is not even in alpha yet. Like, it's barely playable.
Yeah.
So that won't be relevant for a while. But next year, the card game's probably going to be,
the first
marketed
thing
a lot.
Yeah.
The first thing out probably, and then Project A will either get more details revealed and maybe released next year, but probably 2021, my guess. So this fortunately gives Blizzard a clock of time before, their inevitable demise.
Yeah.
But this is a really big deal because these games are in direct competition with Blizzard. Like an ability-based hero shooter and a digital trading card game. Like,
those are descriptions of Hearthstone and Overwatch, basically.
Yeah, that's their biggest cash cows. And supposedly, if Diablo gets attacked by Riot, then it's also Diablo, which is like from one of the best-selling PC games of all time, next to Minecraft. And the only thing they're not touching is World of Warcraft, which is understandable, but Riot could maybe be making an MMO as well. I gotta freaking power my headset because I'm a really good person.
Gotcha.
Just said battery low, so
Right. I mean, by the way, the battery was high at the beginning of Havana, and then
gonna be a wake up call for sure. And Blizzard needs to basically have as good of a showing, hopefully, at BlizzCon, where they don't necessarily need to reveal 50 games,
right?
But just to hopefully whatever announcement there is for Overwatch and maybe even Hearthstone is going to be enough to convince people that there's still a reason to have faith in Blizzard. Because honestly, the biggest thing that I think got people the most excited about these two games, the card game and the shooter from Riot, is that they very clearly up front said, we know what you don't like about your games. We know you don't like randomized card packs. We know you don't like it that card games don't take a lot of skill. We're fixing it. We know that you have problems with cheaters in all of the games you play. We know netcode sucks. We know that the infrastructure could be improved. We're doing something about it. That alone just shows like a level of relation. Like, they're in touch with the dedicated players of these genres, because one of the things that Hearthstone players and Overwatch players alike always complain about is like, oh, the devs don't even know what we care about. It's
Right.
like we have all these complaints, but they're going off like, building freaking Lego sets and cookbooks. And
Oh, absolutely.
yeah, so that's a big deal. And I think that hopefully will set up for Blizzard to start thinking of where they need to start angling their productions with Overwatch. In the best case scenario, like you said with Fortnite, Overwatch is still version 1.41. Like we've had 41 major patches in Overwatch right now. There's no Overwatch 2.0. There's been a lot of rumors about an Overwatch 2 or an Overwatch Burning Crusade, Overwatch something.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people said that it'd be like a separate game, like a PvE game. And I don't know what that would be like,
Right.
but I would like to imagine a world where Overwatch 2 is actually Overwatch 2.0, where there is a new mode that adds PvE elements in a fully fleshed manner, but what the game really needs, what Overwatch 1 really needs, is to basically come to a point where it's not recognizable anymore. Because the tank, because like with the tanking crisis and like kind of by extension the support crisis, like there is so many problems that are coming up because of how unfun tanking is and how fun being against tanking is. And so much of the game is balanced around supports and high sustain that it kind of limits what kind of supports you can have or what kind of characters you could have. Because if you look at the game like Paladins, where there is very clear design for tanks to not be infinitely oppressive, all of the there's a character how much do you know about Paladins? Have you played?
Not very much, to be honest. I mean, yeah, not very much. I think I played it once and I just didn't know what was going on, so I was just like, nah, I'm not playing anymore.
Well, to give you a reference, there is a
Right.
character in that game that is very similar to Reinhardt. He has a giant rectangular shield.
Right.
It's on a cooldown,
Mm.
where once the shield is gone, it's gone. If you
Okay.
kill it, it is gone. Like that is not something that Reinhardt does, and that's really important because you could actually wait out the duration of that shield, or you can know to start moving once it's gone. But things like that, like shieldings and barriers in that game, don't last forever, and healing in that game isn't OP because players can get a thing just called Cauterize, which is an item, which basically applies a healing debuff to whoever you shoot, which, is a pretty important item at this point because healing is, of course, OP. But as the game goes on, supports become more about what they can do to make big plays without healing instead of just, oh, we have so much healing that they can't kill anyone. And that's
Right.
really interesting because like the tanks and supports and paladins, it feels like you're still playing a shooter. Like they have guns, they have abilities that do damage, and like it's just really neat. But it's not like that in Overwatch. And I think if it went more in that direction, it would be more fun to play tank and support. And then you could have a world where role queue creates more balanced matches and good queue times for everyone. But that would be such a big undertaking for Overwatch right now. This is like their big problem. They can't rebuild the plane while it's still flying unless they made a new game or waited so much time to release Overwatch 2, a brand new plane that we're just moving everyone into. So if they do that and they rebalance every character roughly, and they, change how healing and tanking systems are along with everything else, it would be a mostly recognizable game because, you probably have the same maps. Maybe they could get rid of 2CP, but, my opinion. But it would be different enough where we could look at it through a new lens and say this is a new game, kind of like what
Yeah.
Fortnite has done. Fortnite
Right.
is still mostly similar, but like so much of it has changed where if you told someone, hey, this is a new Fortnite game,
Right.
they would believe you.
Exactly. It feels like a new game. Even just by watching the trailer, you could just do so much more. from what it looks like. And I think you're right. I think it's and even the way they presented it, where like the black hole for like 2 days or whatever, the present between the presentation and the actual gameplay and changing the whole game itself, like all of those things. I mean, Blizzard could really take some notes on that. I mean, they really could, because they wouldn't have to make a whole new game. They would just have to kind of, like you said, they would have to just rebalance, and they've done it in a vacuum. I mean, I remember when they reworked Symmetra and Mercy and all those characters, where they changed that character's core abilities completely, and people were like, what, how are we supposed to live with the new and it was different. But like, if you think about it, it needed to be done. I mean, having a 5-man res, for Mercy, that was, I mean, to a lot of people, that was like, that's insane. It was the problem we have now with survivability. That was the problem then. It was right. Like, you could just, you could just wait for the 5-man res. But so, yeah, like I absolutely agree. And I think that's definitely something, and it also answers one of the questions that was in chat as well, that they were talking about what does Riot need to do to avoid doing some of the things that some of the same traps that Overwatch did. And I think you kind of answered that, where they already kind of started doing that, in the sense that they're listening to players. They're already saying, my biggest thing was they were talking about how the ping was going to be different, like how it wasn't going to be like, oh, whoever has the best ping is going to be the better shooter. They were gonna address those type of issues. And yeah, I think that's absolutely something that's really cool. We're coming up on the end of the show. We're gonna be wrapping up here. Before I do so, though, I wanted to just show I was watching you play all day, and I clipped the section of the that I think explains, for anybody who hasn't seen EvilToaster's Twitch. I mean, obviously a lot of you have already, but for anybody who hasn't, I feel like this clip perfectly kind of surmises EvilToaster as a streamer and everything, because it's one of those it's one of those clips that when I saw it, I was like, oh, this is him in a clip, basically. So I'm gonna show the clip, and then we'll wrap the show a little bit, and so we'll check it. Let's check it out really quick.
Uh-oh.
He's shooting it. Force the do more. Nice. Good for him. He's one. Do more.
Incredible. People are dead. Wait, I killed 3?
Widow top left. No, mine.
So that's, to me, that's probably the perfect analogy for EvilToaster, where you do so well in little micromanagements, like you're getting grabbed and you get out of it, and you track the Doomfist really well, where you kill him, and then you also kill 2 people on the side of you as well, and you do really well at trying to like manage these little circumstances, and then at the end of it, you're like, oh, I killed 3. I didn't even realize. I feel that clip perfectly kind of describes EvilToaster in a nutshell, basically.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. I was genuinely surprised I killed 3. Like, I'm pretty sure I just landed some stray bullets as I was tracking Doomfist. It just happened to headshot people.
Right, but I think that's what's great about watching you, is that you do things really well, and I think you're very entertaining when you do some other things that you might not even know you're doing, and it's entertaining to watch. And I think I really enjoy watching all of your streams, and I wish you nothing but luck for any of the future streams and stuff like that. If you haven't checked out EvilToaster, twitch.tv/EvilToaster, amazing streamer. Very, very good Orisa player, and very good Hammond and Ryan player, and just tank player in general. I saw you play some Roadhog today as well as some Zarya, so he's out there flexing, boys. He's out there. So thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it, man.
Thank you, dude. It was really fun.
All right, well, guys, that's been the show off the wall. I'm gonna go ahead and rate somebody from our community. And like I mentioned before, thank you so much for Dash Dreads and Juggernaut Regen, and of course CGL Console Gaming League for sponsoring the show. I really appreciate it. And EvilToaster, I mean, if you ever want to come on the show again, let me know. I will happy to have you. I love having these discussions on the show. I think it's probably the best part of having guests and stuff like that. So thank you so much for that. And until next time, if you want to get updates on who's going to be on the show, check me out on twitter.com/dazzle167. Tomorrow we're going to have Mjov. So he's going to be really cool. We're going to talk to him about Fortnite, and he's going to be a really cool interview. So go check that out. That's going to be really cool. And yeah, we'll see you guys later. Peace.